I never expected a simple violation notice to turn into an all-out war. But when the HOA towed all my cars and demanded outrageous fines, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Imagine their faces when they realized the towing company they had been using to punish me was actually mine. How far would you go if an HOA tried to steal from you? Welcome to my channel. If you love insane HOA revenge stories, hit the subscribe button and let's get started. The bright orange violation notice was impossible to miss, taped right in the center of my front door like a warning shot from a tyrant too cowardly to deliver it face to face. Excessive vehicles violation. Immediate action required. Fine, $500. My eyebrows furrowed as I scanned the letter, my annoyance growing with every bureaucratic threat listed in the fine print. The HOA, in all its self-righteous glory, had apparently decided that my driveway was suddenly a problem. My offense? Owning 3 cars. My wife's Audi Q5, my Porsche 911, and my daughter's Honda Civic. All neatly parked in our own damn driveway. No overgrown grass, no oil leaks staining the pavement, no abandoned junkers taking up space. Just 3 well-maintained, legally registered vehicles sitting in a place I had paid for when I bought this house. I exhaled sharply, stepping back inside with the notice in hand. My wife, Emily, was in the kitchen sipping coffee, her laptop open as she reviewed patient notes for her next shift at the hospital. She glanced up and saw the expression on my face. "What now?" she asked, setting her mug down. Karen Mitchell, our insufferable HOA president, had made herself an infamous figure in the neighborhood. Every community had one. The power-drunk tyrant who acted like running the HOA was more important than running the country. She lived 2 doors down, a woman with a surgically frozen face and an attitude that made dictators look reasonable, the kind of person who thrived on petty control, wielding her clipboard like a sword and her bylaws like a Bible. "Apparently we own too many cars," I said, waving the paper at Emily. "Violation, $500. Immediate action required." She frowned. "Too many cars? We have 3. That's not excessive." According to Karen, it is. I read through the violation notice again, scanning for specifics. Maximum of 2 vehicles per driveway. All others must be parked in the garage. I rolled my eyes. "We literally can't fit all 3 cars in the garage. Your medical supplies take up half of it and my tools and storage bins take up the rest." Emily's frown deepened. "Didn't we go to an HOA meeting last year where they said driveways were fine as long as we weren't blocking sidewalks?" "Yep," I nodded, flipping to the back of the notice where the supposed bylaw was cited. Amendment 14B, Residential Vehicle Limits. And guess when this rule was added? She didn't even need to guess. Karen did this just to screw with us. Bingo. My daughter Lily walked in at that moment, dressed in her college hoodie and stretching as she yawned. "What's going on?" she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. I handed her the notice. She read it, then blinked. "Wait, my car is a problem now?" "Apparently," I muttered. "The mighty HOA decrees that only 2 cars are allowed per driveway. The 3rd must be parked in the garage, which, as you know, is impossible." Lily snorted. "Well, Karen can choke." Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "Are you going to talk to them?" "Yeah," I nodded, already grabbing my keys. "I'll go to the office now and deal with this." The HOA office was a small, overly decorated, self-important space in the community center. The walls were lined with framed copies of the bylaws, like some kind of twisted shrine to bureaucratic nonsense. Karen sat behind the main desk, her reading glasses perched at the end of her nose as she typed something into her computer. She looked up as I walked in and smiled, the kind of fake, passive-aggressive smile that people in customer service give when they're about to ruin your day. "Ah, Mr. Thompson," she said in a syrupy tone. "I assume you're here about the violation notice?" "You assume correctly," I said, slapping the notice onto the desk. "What's the issue here? I've owned 3 cars for years and suddenly it's a problem." Karen pursed her lips. As you'll see in the revised bylaws, we recently voted to implement stricter parking regulations. It's about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics and preventing clutter. I resisted the urge to laugh. Clutter? It's 3 normal cars parked in a driveway. What's next? Are you going to tell me my mailbox is too symmetrical? Karen folded her hands neatly over her clipboard. Rules are rules, Mr. Thompson. If you'd like to appeal the violation, you're welcome to submit a formal request, but I should warn you that appeals have a non-refundable $250 processing fee. My jaw clenched. So let me get this straight. You're fining me $500 for something that wasn't a violation a month ago? And if I want to fight it, I have to pay just to be heard. She beamed. Yes. It helps cut down on frivolous complaints. Frivolous? I repeated, laughing bitterly. Lady, I pay my dues. I keep my house in perfect shape. I don't throw parties, I don't make noise, I don't cause problems. And now you're trying to fine me because my daughter's car is sitting in our own damn driveway? Karen's smile faded slightly. I don't make the rules, she said, flipping a page on her clipboard. The community does. I leaned in. And who exactly in the community voted for this? She didn't answer. I smirked. That's what I thought. I'm not paying the fine, Karen. She sighed dramatically and pulled a stapled document from a drawer, placing it neatly on the desk in front of me. Then I'm afraid the fine will double in 7 days, and if it remains unpaid, the HOA will take further action, including towing the unauthorized vehicle at the owner's expense. I exhaled slowly through my nose, gripping the edge of the desk as I fought the urge to flip it over. Towing my cars over this? This was pure, unchecked petty power. The kind of nonsense that happened when you gave the worst people in the world even the smallest amount of authority. I forced a smile. Okay, Karen. She perked up, expecting a fight. Okay. Yep, I said, pocketing the violation notice. You do what you have to do. She frowned, clearly unsatisfied with my response. Well, I'm glad you understand the importance of... I turned and walked out before she could finish, my mind already racing with plans. If she wanted to play games, fine. I could play too. I drove home, parked in my driveway with all 3 cars still there, and leaned against my Porsche, arms crossed as I looked up at Karen's house. She was watching me from her window, her eyes narrowing. Let's see what happens next, I muttered under my breath. Little did she know, the next step in her plan would be her biggest mistake. The morning after my meeting with Karen, I woke up to an empty driveway. All 3 cars gone. My wife's Audi, my Porsche, my daughter's Honda, just vanished. At first, I thought maybe Emily had taken the Audi early for work, but then I noticed her hospital bag was still inside by the door. My heart sank. Karen actually did it. She had my cars towed. That lunatic really followed through on her pathetic power trip. I barely had time to let the rage settle before my phone rang. I didn't even check the caller ID before answering. Yeah. A boss? A familiar voice crackled on the other end. It was Eric, one of my dispatchers at the towing company I owned. Hey, quick question. You don't happen to own a black Porsche, an Audi, and a silver Honda Civic, do you? I blinked. Yeah, why? Pause, then a laugh. Because we just towed them. I nearly dropped my phone. Wait, what? Yeah, man. Some HOA called us up this morning. Said they had unauthorized vehicles in a driveway. Paid up front too. We just brought them. I felt the slow burn of realization creep up my spine. The HOA had used my own damn company to tow my cars. A deep chuckle rumbled in my throat. You're telling me, I said, rubbing my temple, that the HOA paid us to tow my own cars to my own lot. Eric whistled. Yeah, I thought it was weird. But hey, money's money, right? You want us to process the impound or? I grinned. Oh, this was too good. Nope, just keep them there. I'll swing by later. Sure thing, boss. Eric snorted. Man, these HOA people are something else. I hung up and let the realization settle. Karen thought she won. She thought she had gotten me. but in reality she just handed me a loaded gun and begged me to pull the trigger. I played it cool the rest of the day, going about my business as if nothing happened. I didn't call the HOA, didn't rage in their office, didn't send a single email. I wanted Karen to think I was panicking. I wanted her to savor this little victory before I turned the tables so hard she'd forget which way was up. Later that evening, I drove down to my own impound lot, where my 3 cars were sitting perfectly fine behind the fence, untouched. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. I walked into the office, grabbed the paperwork, and in less than 5 minutes had all 3 of my vehicles released for free. But I wasn't done. Oh no. Instead of simply bringing my cars home, I had a better idea. I called Eric back. Hey, remember those HOA idiots? Hard to forget. Yeah, do me a favor. Next time they call for a tow, accept the job, but send the cars straight to a reserved lot. No processing, no fees. Just keep bringing them in and we'll keep cycling them back out. They're going to think I'm Houdini. Eric cackled on the other end. Oh, this is going to be fun. And so the game began. The next morning, I woke up and deliberately parked all 3 cars back in the driveway. I even went outside, coffee in hand, making a big show of washing my Porsche. It wasn't long before I spotted Karen lurking from across the street, gripping her clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. She wanted to say something, wanted to storm over and demand an explanation, but she couldn't. Not yet. I smiled at her and gave a little wave. She stormed inside. Sure enough, by lunchtime my cars were gone again. Another tow job, another fee, another power trip, another failed attempt. I let the HOA play their little game for 3 more rounds. 3 times they sent a tow truck. 3 times I let my own employees take my cars, only to magically have them back in my driveway the next morning. Karen was losing it. I saw her staring at my driveway every day, watching as if trying to understand how in the hell I was pulling this off. By the 4th day, I decided to crank the trolling up a notch. I sent my guys to tow one of my cars themselves and park it back in my own impound lot before the HOA even had the chance. The result? A fuming, absolutely bewildered Karen standing in my driveway, screaming at the tow truck driver. This is unacceptable. This car was just here this morning. Where is it? The driver, who was in on the joke, just shrugged. Ma'am, all I know is we don't have an order for it. Must have been moved legally. Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. But it was. She pointed at my driveway like she was accusing it of treason. I saw it here this morning. I stepped outside, stretching like I'd just woken up from a nap. Everything okay, Karen? Her eyes snapped to me. Where is your Porsche? I sipped my coffee, looking around innocently. That's weird. It was just here. Must have gone for a drive. Karen's eye twitched. This isn't over. She hissed, storming off toward her house. Oh, but it was. For 5 more days I let this cycle repeat. Tow, retrieve, park, tow, retrieve, park. The HOA was hemorrhaging money, burning through their petty little budget trying to punish me. And every single time I got the last laugh. By the end of the week, Karen called for a mandatory emergency HOA meeting. I made sure to show up fashionably late. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. The board members were whispering, exchanging frantic glances. Papers were scattered across the table, and Karen looked like she had aged 10 years in the last 5 days. Mr. Thompson, Karen said, barely holding it together. Would you care to explain how your cars keep reappearing? I shrugged. I don't know, Karen. Maybe they just like being home. She slammed her hands on the table. Don't play dumb with me. We've towed your vehicle 6 times. The board is demanding answers. I leaned forward. Oh, you want answers? The room went dead silent. I pulled out a piece of paper and slid it across the table. Karen hesitated, then picked it up. As she read, her face drained of color. Surprise, I said, smirking. Turns out I own the towing company you've been using. Karen's jaw dropped. The entire board gasped. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment. So technically speaking, Every time you've ordered my cars to be towed, you've been paying me." A beat of stunned silence. Then in a low, dangerous voice Karen whispered, "You son of a—" I cut her off, standing up and clapping my hands together. Now, I think I've made my point." Karen looked like she was ready to explode. But this wasn't over yet, because now that she was backed into a corner, she was about to make the biggest mistake of all. Karen was unraveling. I could see it in the way she stormed across her lawn every morning, glaring at my driveway as if sheer willpower could make my cars disappear for good. It must have driven her insane. The HOA had towed my vehicles over and over again, yet somehow they kept returning, unscathed, unpaid for, and in the exact same spots. Her frustration boiled over into the HOA's latest newsletter, a passive-aggressive masterpiece filled with vague warnings about repeat offenders and deliberate attempts to undermine community standards. But I knew exactly who she was targeting. She wasn't just mad, she was desperate. I let the game go on for another week, casually strolling to my cars each morning, sipping my coffee while Karen seethed from across the street. At one point, I even left a note on my Porsche's windshield before it was towed. "Nice try. See you tomorrow." I had barely finished my lunch that day before Eric texted me, "Yo, they just towed your Porsche again. This is getting hilarious." I chuckled, shaking my head. The HOA was practically setting fire to its own budget, throwing money at my company just to inconvenience me. They were funding my next vacation without even realizing it. But as much as I was enjoying the chaos, I knew Karen wouldn't just take this loss lying down. She was going to escalate, and I was more than ready. The next notice wasn't about towing. It was a fine, $3,000 for repeat violations of vehicle storage restrictions. I actually laughed when I opened the envelope. $3,000 for parking in my own driveway? They must have been out of their minds. But then I spotted the note at the bottom, printed in bold: "Failure to comply will result in legal action and potential liens on your property." That's when I knew Karen was playing dirty. She wasn't just trying to get me to move my cars. She was trying to bleed me dry. Still, I wasn't going to crack. I let the fines pile up, stacking unopened envelopes on my kitchen counter like trophies. I knew they had no legal standing, but Karen was determined to break me. When the $3,000 fine didn't faze me, the next letter threatened mandatory garage inspections, a clear attempt to force my cars out of sight. I almost wanted to let them in, just to watch their faces when they realized there was no room for the cars in the garage to begin with. Instead, I did what any reasonable person would do. I ignored them. But then Karen made her next move. An emergency HOA meeting. The email arrived in the middle of the night, summoning all residents to discuss an urgent issue affecting the integrity of our community. The wording was meant to scare people, make them think something serious was at stake. And maybe it was for Karen, because this wasn't about the neighborhood. This was about me. I made sure to arrive late, casually strolling into the packed room while Karen was mid-rant. Every chair was filled, neighbors whispering to each other, eyes darting toward me as I walked in. Karen stopped mid-sentence the second she saw me. Her eyes narrowed. "Ah, Mr. Thompson," she said, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "So glad you could finally join us." I smirked. Didn't want to miss the show. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Karen's jaw tightened. She cleared her throat and gestured to a slideshow behind her, where blown-up photos of my driveway filled the screen like some kind of crime scene investigation. My Porsche, my wife's Audi, my daughter's Honda, all circled in red as if I had been caught running an underground car smuggling ring. "This," Karen announced, sweeping a hand toward the screen, "is what's ruining our community." I let out a short laugh. "Parking." Karen's head snapped toward me. "Not just parking, Mr. Thompson. Blatant disregard for the rules." I folded my arms, waiting. This was going to be good. "4 weeks now," she continued, pacing, "we have made multiple attempts to enforce our community guidelines, only to be met with deliberate defiance. Vehicles are removed only to mysteriously return. Fines are issued only to be ignored. She turned back to the crowd, her voice rising. How can we expect to maintain order when some residents believe they are above the rules? A few nods, a few murmurs of agreement, but mostly a lot of uncomfortable shifting. Karen, sensing weakness, pounced. She pulled out a new proposal and slapped it onto the table. That is why I am proposing an immediate amendment to our bylaws. One that will allow the HOA to directly enforce vehicle removals without the owner's consent, with all towing fees covered by the violator. I raised an eyebrow. You mean without due process? Karen didn't flinch. We already have due process. Right? I scoffed. That's why you've spent thousands of dollars towing my cars and they still keep showing up in my driveway. Karen's eye twitched. She knew I was baiting her, but she couldn't help herself. That's another issue we need to address, actually, she said, her tone sharper. Residents are entitled to transparency. We all deserve to know exactly how your cars keep returning. I smirked. Magic. A few laughs from the crowd. Karen looked ready to explode. This isn't a joke, she snapped. We take community standards seriously, and we will not tolerate anyone trying to make a mockery of them. I stepped forward, letting the moment hang in the air. Then I pulled out my own piece of paper, a copy of my company's recent invoices. You know what's funny, Karen? I said loud enough for everyone to hear. The only person making a mockery of the HOA is you. Because while you've been throwing thousands of dollars at a towing company to try and punish me, I've been making money off of it. Karen's face drained of color. Whispers erupted through the room. I tossed the invoices onto the table. Turns out the towing company you've been hiring to remove my cars? I own it. Karen froze. The board members stiffened. The entire room went dead silent. I was perfectly happy minding my own business, I continued, shrugging. But you just kept poking the bear. And every time you sent for a tow, every time you fined me, every time you tried to make my life hell, you were paying me to do it. Someone in the back burst out laughing. Karen slammed her hands onto the table. This is a scam. I tilted my head. A scam? I didn't make you call my company. You did that all on your own. One of the board members, a man named Greg, who usually went along with Karen, cleared his throat uncomfortably. Karen, is this true? Karen opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough to make sure only she could hear me. Careful, Karen, I murmured. Because if you push too hard, I just might have to start looking into where all that HOA money is really going. She paled. Because she knew I wasn't bluffing. And this wasn't over. Not even close. Karen was unraveling and I knew it. The moment I exposed the HOA for using my own towing company to enforce their ridiculous fines, I saw the shift in her demeanor. That ironclad grip she thought she had on the neighborhood cracking. The support she relied on from the board wavering. And worst of all for her, she knew I wasn't done yet. I expected retaliation, but even I didn't think she'd be stupid enough to take it to the next level. The morning started like any other. I woke up, grabbed my coffee, and stepped outside to admire all three of my perfectly legal cars parked exactly where they belonged. The Porsche was gleaming under the morning sun. My wife's Audi sat untouched, and my daughter's Honda looked the same as the night before. It must have driven Karen insane. After weeks of towing battles, she had no other legal moves left. So she did what all desperate, power-hungry people do when they lose control. She broke the law. I didn't notice at first. I got in the Porsche, turned the key, and was about to back out when I saw it. A long, jagged scratch running across the driver's side door, extending all the way to the back. Not an accident, not a mistake. This was intentional. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. I stepped out, taking a closer look, and that's when I saw the shattered glass. My passenger side window was smashed in. There were footprints on the seat. Someone had been inside my car. My stomach burned with rage, but I wasn't stupid. Instead of reacting, I turned on my heels and walked straight back into my house. I didn't call the HOA. I didn't march over to Karen's door demanding answers. I already knew who did it, but more importantly, I already had proof. I pulled up my phone and accessed the live security feed from my driveway. 3 different cameras, all with night vision, all recording in crystal clear quality. I rewound the footage, fast-forwarding through the night until there it was, 2:37 a.m. A figure crept into my driveway. The person wore dark clothes, a hood up, and moved cautiously, looking over their shoulder, but not cautiously enough. I zoomed in. Karen. It was her. I actually laughed out loud. This woman had lost her mind. She must have thought that without a towing company to weaponize, her only option was to destroy my property herself. I watched, barely able to believe what I was seeing, as she pulled out a metal key and dragged it across the paint of my car. Then, as if that wasn't enough, she picked up a brick, a damn brick, and smashed my passenger side window. The camera caught her face clear as day. The way she smirked after doing it, that was the moment I knew she was finished. She had crossed the line. She didn't just vandalize my car. She committed a crime. I didn't even hesitate. I saved the footage, backed it up to 3 different storage drives, and sent a copy to my lawyer. Then, I made a few phone calls. The first, the police. Yeah, I'd like to report an act of criminal vandalism. I have it all on camera. The second, the insurance company. Yeah, I've got damage to my vehicle. The culprit? Oh, don't worry, I've got clear footage of them doing it. And the third, the local news. Oh, if Karen wanted to play dirty, she had no idea just how filthy I could get. The cops arrived first. I stood outside, arms crossed, as 2 officers examined the damage to my Porsche. One of them, Officer Daniels, was already shaking his head. This isn't random, he muttered, running a hand over the deep scratches. This was deliberate. You said you have footage? I handed him my phone and he played the video. His eyebrows shot up. Wait, is this? He squinted. This is Karen Mitchell, HOA president, right? I grinned. That's the one. The second officer, a younger guy named Rodriguez, let out a low whistle. She actually used a brick and she didn't even wear a mask? Damn, that's sloppy. Daniels nodded. Yeah, this is open and shut. We'll go ahead and file the report. You'll want to press charges, right? Oh, I said, grinning wider. Absolutely. Karen had spent weeks trying to make my life miserable, but this was different. She had no legal way to get rid of my cars, so she resorted to crime. And now she was going to pay for it. The next part of my plan was even better. See, it wasn't just the cops I called. It was the local news station too. And when the reporters showed up that afternoon, camera crew in tow, the entire neighborhood came out to watch. I made sure to give them everything. The damage to my car, filmed from every angle. The HOA's history of harassment, explained in full detail. The security footage of Karen vandalizing my property, broadcast for the entire town to see. By the time Karen realized what was happening, it was too late. She came stomping across the street, red-faced and furious, just as the reporter turned to interview me. You're exaggerating this entire situation, she snapped. The reporter didn't even blink. Ma'am, are you denying that this is you on the footage? Karen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She was trapped. If she denied it, she'd be lying to the entire town on live television. If she admitted it, she'd be confessing to a crime. I crossed my arms, barely able to contain my amusement. So, Karen, I said loud enough for everyone to hear, what's the HOA's stance on criminal activity? The neighborhood was dead silent. Then someone laughed. It was Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who had been fined by Karen for having the wrong shade of flower pots last summer. Well, she said, looks like Karen's the real community problem, doesn't it? More neighbors murmured in agreement. Karen looked around, realizing what was happening. She was losing. The HOA board members who once blindly supported her were suddenly avoiding eye contact. Neighbors who once feared her fines were now watching her like she was the criminal. Because she was. The police stepped forward. "Mrs. Mitchell, we're going to need you to come with us." Karen whipped around. "What? This is ridiculous. I was just—" She stopped herself. She had no excuse. No way out. I watched as they placed her in cuffs right there in the street. The cameras caught everything. The mighty Karen Mitchell, queen of the HOA, was hauled into the back of a police car while the entire neighborhood watched. I stood there, arms crossed, and smirked. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. And it was only the beginning. Karen's arrest wasn't the end of this war. It was the beginning of the end. She thought she could terrorize the neighborhood unchecked, weaponizing fines and rules against anyone who dared defy her. But now she was handcuffed in the back of a squad car, her reputation in ruins, and her kingdom crumbling around her. And yet, I knew the HOA wouldn't just roll over and die. There were more snakes in that den. They would scramble to save themselves, distance themselves from Karen, and act as if they were innocent bystanders. I wasn't going to let that happen. Karen had been the face of the HOA's tyranny, but she hadn't acted alone. There were other board members, all of whom had signed off on her decisions, all of whom had enabled her power trip. They'd been complicit in every ridiculous fine, every shady rule change, and every underhanded scheme. And if Karen had been willing to commit actual crimes, what else had this HOA been up to behind closed doors? I planned to find out. I started by doing what Karen never expected. I followed the money. The beauty of an HOA is that, legally speaking, it functions like a business. Every dollar collected in fees, fines, and penalties has to be accounted for. Every transaction, every vendor contract, every so-called community improvement project had to leave a paper trail. And since Karen had been removed from power, the HOA was now vulnerable. They had no leader to cover their tracks. I requested an audit. At first, the HOA stonewalled me. They tried to tell me I had no right to see their financials, that the records were confidential, that only the board could review them. They were wrong. According to state law, as a dues-paying member of the HOA, I had the right to inspect the financial records at any time. And if they refused, I could take legal action, which is exactly what I did. I filed a lawsuit not just against Karen, but against the entire HOA board. My claim: financial mismanagement, fraud, and the illegal use of HOA funds. Now lawsuits take time, but subpoenas? They move a lot faster. Within a week, the HOA was legally obligated to hand over their books. And the moment I started combing through the numbers, I realized why they'd been so desperate to keep them hidden. This wasn't just mismanagement. It was embezzlement. Tens of thousands of dollars had been diverted to mystery expenses, community maintenance fees that were never used for actual maintenance, vendor contracts that didn't exist, fake invoices, inflated charges. And worst of all, direct payments to Karen's personal bank account. Karen wasn't just a dictator. She was a thief. I took everything, every suspicious transaction, every missing dollar, every damning piece of evidence, and compiled a full report. Then I leaked it. I sent copies to every single homeowner in the neighborhood. I sent copies to the local news. I sent copies to the state's HOA regulatory board. And then I called another emergency HOA meeting. By the time I arrived at the community center, the entire neighborhood was already there. The room was packed, the air buzzing with outrage and whispered conversations. People had read the report. They knew what was coming. The remaining HOA board members sat at the front of the room, looking like a firing squad waiting for their turn. None of them had. They had not spoken publicly since Karen's arrest, having tried and failed to regain control. I walked up to the microphone, holding up the stack of financial documents. "This," I said, my voice carrying across the hushed room, "is how the HOA has been stealing from us." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Over the last 3 years, this board has embezzled more than $80,000 from the community. Money that was supposed to go toward maintaining the neighborhood, improving property values, and funding actual projects. I flipped through the pages, reading off key transactions. Here's a $12,000 charge for security services that doesn't exist. Here's $5,000 spent on community outreach, which shockingly only went to Karen's personal account. Here's $19,000 in unexplained maintenance fees that never paid for a single repair. The whispers turned into full-blown shouting. I wasn't even finished. Here's the best part, I said, holding up the final document. You know all those fines you've been paying, the ones for violations that Karen and her board made up? Well, guess what? They were never deposited into the HOA account. They were redirected into Karen's bank. Gasps. Shouts. She robbed us, someone yelled. We paid for this community, another voice shouted. A woman stood up in the back, waving her copy of the report. I've been fined 7 times in the last year. Where the hell did my money go? I turned to face the board members, who looked like they were about to puke. Care to explain yourselves? Greg, one of the spineless board members, adjusted his tie, his voice shaking. We had no idea Karen was... Oh, really? I cut him off. Because your signature is on half of these transactions. You expect us to believe you were just blindly approving everything? Greg shut up real fast. I turned back to the crowd. Here's what's going to happen next. This board? They're done. A loud cheer. We are going to vote every single one of them out tonight. Another cheer. And then we're going to press charges. The room erupted. One of the board members tried to sneak out. Didn't make it. The neighbors physically blocked the exit. People were furious. Years of being bullied, fined, and nickel-and-dimed had led to this moment. Greg tried to speak again, but it didn't matter. The vote happened on the spot. Unanimous. Every single board member gone. But I wasn't done yet. The next day, I met with my lawyer and officially filed charges against Karen and the entire former board. Embezzlement, fraud, abuse of power, the works. Karen? She wasn't getting out of this one. The HOA dismantled, the fines refunded to every homeowner. And me? I parked all 3 cars in my driveway that night, sat on my porch, cracked open a beer and smiled, because the HOA was dead and I had killed it. The collapse of the HOA wasn't an explosion. It was a slow-motion implosion. A chain reaction of panic, resignations, and complete and utter financial destruction. Once the neighborhood voted out the entire board, the real legal hell began. The lawsuits stacked like bricks. The state's HOA regulatory board launched its own investigation into Karen and her cronies. And it turned out my little exposé barely scratched the surface. There were even more missing funds, more expenses that had been funneled into personal accounts, and a $25,000 landscaping charge that had paid for Karen's private backyard renovation. Greg, the former treasurer, flipped immediately. The moment the auditor started poking around, he turned into a sniveling rat, desperate to avoid jail time. He gave up everything: how they'd faked receipts, how they'd overbilled residents, how Karen had blackmailed homeowners into donating to special projects that were really just slush funds for her own spending. The court cases moved fast. The judge didn't waste time. Karen's defense was laughable. She tried to play the victim, blaming clerical errors and misunderstandings, but then the prosecution pulled out the security footage of her vandalizing my car. That alone was enough to torpedo any chance she had of playing innocent. The best part? The lawsuits drained her dry. She fought to keep her house, but the legal fees piled up. The court ruled that she had to pay restitution to the homeowners she stole from. And since she had no money left, she had only one option left. She had to sell her house. And oh, how the tables had turned. She listed the house at a premium price, thinking she could still walk away with something. But this neighborhood was no longer under her rule. And without her iron grip, property values had actually started dropping. Turns out, when you run a place like a dictatorship, it doesn't exactly attract buyers. And I made sure she never got what she wanted. When potential buyers came to check out her house, I made it a personal mission to be outside, washing my 3 cars, chatting with neighbors, making sure they knew everything about what kind of HOA used to run this place. Yeah, Karen ran this neighborhood into the ground, I'd say casually, shaking my head. Took thousands from homeowners, got herself arrested. Place is finally bouncing back now that she's leaving. I watched the interested buyers vanish one by one. The price dropped and dropped and dropped until she had no choice but to sell it for way less than it was worth. Karen packed up in the dead of night. No goodbye, no farewell speech, just a U-Haul pulling out of the driveway, loaded with the remnants of her miserable little reign. I stood on my porch, beer in hand, watching her drive away for the last time. And for the first time since this entire war started, I finally had peace. The HOA dead. The board members facing financial ruin. Karen gone. And my driveway completely, beautifully, legally filled with my 3 cars. No more fines, no more notices, no more threats. I parked my Porsche front and center just for the hell of it, threw my feet up on the porch railing and enjoyed the view, because the war was over and I had